Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our special webinar for Standard Chartered Bank on this wonderful occasion of International Women's Day. We're live here from our Mumbai office. My name is Patricia Sharma. I'm head of retail marketing for the bank globally across our franchise of 30 countries, 1,000 branches, 9 million customers. And today it is our especial pleasure to have with us Ms. Radhika Gupta, CEO of Edelweiss Asset Management. She needs no introduction. Those of you in the financial services industry here will know her name. She is an asset management professional with many years of global and Indian expertise. She started her career at McKinsey in the US and then became a hedge fund manager with AQR Capital, one of the world's most prominent systematic asset managers. She then moved to India as an entrepreneur to start her own Forefront Capital Management, and this was acquired by Edelweiss in 2014. The rest is pretty much history. She grew that business tremendously. She was also leading the Edelweiss acquisition of JP Morgan's mutual fund business, Ambit Capital's AIF business, and today, since 2017, she has been leading Edelweiss Asset Management. Radhika, we're so happy to have you here. We've heard so much about you. You have a blue chip background. You come from excellent educational institutions, Wharton. And of course, today you are a global citizen, well recognized, a TEDx speaker, and most importantly, I read your wonderful little story about how being a bridge player really helped you.
I'm so excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
Welcome. So, Radhika, this is International Women's Day, and we are, both of us, in an industry which is actually dominated by men. So please tell me, from your experience, how has being a woman in such a male-dominated field helped you, hindered you? How has it impacted your career?
So, wishing all of, the viewers a very, very happy International Women's Day. And in the morning, a friend of mine who was a man asked me, why do we need International Women's Day? And just to answer your question, I said, it's a fact that if you look at India, 1 out of 4 women participate in the workforce, and 3 out of 4 men participate. So that's why we need International Women's Day. I think, the fact that we live in a male-dominated world is just known. I mean, it's a fact. And I think there are 3 approaches that you can have to it. I'm sure you probably experience it, as do many women. You're the only one when you go into a board meeting that's not dressed in a black suit, or a blue shirt. Or, you're the only woman there who's going to the ladies' bathroom and there's a bio break. I mean, all of us have these stories to tell. One approach is to feel, upset about it and feel hindered by it. And, that's a logical approach and it's very natural. The second approach, which I followed for much of my career, was to ignore it and say, you know what, it doesn't matter. So is it. I'm going to lead my life. The third approach, however, is one that I've recently discovered, and that's to celebrate it. And it's to celebrate the fact that you are a woman, and that makes you special in your own way, and you stand out, and that makes you unique and different, and you bring special things to the table. And all over the world, we celebrate not just diversity of gender, but diversity of thinking. So now I celebrate it.
That is wonderful. Actually, it's really timely. I think, what we have seen over many years is that women have made huge advances. I actually wanted to point out also, Standard Chartered has been running for many years an emerging affluent study. In 2018, we did our 4th survey across 11,000 customers in 11 countries, and the results are astounding. I think today 84% of our emerging affluent women have degrees, whereas in their mothers, less than half of them had degrees.
Wow.
Today, 96% of our emerging affluent women in our markets are working. Way back when, it was just a fraction of their mothers who were working. And in particular, although you quoted some statistics about India. Within the emerging affluent segment for India, India has among the most, the women who are in the fastest growing category. 68% of the women in India, in our emerging affluent study, are in what we called the supercharged mobility segment, doing well above the 32% of men in that same category.
Oh, wow.
So we are absolutely celebrating the fact that women today are doing so much more than their mothers were, doing actually a lot better, frankly, than the men. So this is very timely. So in your role at Edelweiss and in your whole career, what have you found to be perhaps the real strengths of being a woman in this field?
I think there are a couple. Obviously, you can't generalize. I mean, there are different kinds of men and there are different kinds of women, so I would never want to generalize it. But I do believe that sort of the future of the workplace is a lot more feminine. And I'm not saying women, I'm saying it's feminine. And let me talk about that just a little bit. So if you look at sort of the qualities that you want in your working professional, one is leadership. And leadership, I think Jack Ma said this, it comes with a lot of empathy. It comes with the ability to listen. I think women on average, and again, I hate to generalize, but I think they bring that wonderfully to the table. Just as an example, you see a meeting with 7 women in a conference room, and you'll just see that they listen to each other a lot more. It happens. They don't talk over each other. They listen a lot more. So I think empathy is something that women can bring as leaders to the table. Another thing that we talk about, and you would relate to this, is the fact that you want to do the best for each customer. It's all about customization, giving customers the best experience. These are things that come naturally to women. I mean, everybody will tell you how their mother essentially made pasta for, my brother because he liked pasta. And she made Indian food for me and she did something else for my father. In essence, she was giving each customer a very, very different experience. So those are the kind of skills that are in demand in the future and they come very naturally to us.
That is really wonderful. And I'm sure that actually your being at the head now of Edelweiss has also put a very different spin to this whole industry. Frankly, you're an inspiration to women out there. So, we are so happy to have you here. But maybe I can ask also, have you ever felt at a disadvantage? And what has that taught you in your career?
It's very easy for me, and I'll be very honest with you. In my younger days in my career, I often felt that this whole talk of gender diversity was overstated. And I was like, why do people even talk about this? As I've gotten more senior, ironically, I've realized it's a very, very important issue. Have I ever felt disadvantaged? I think anybody who's been in the minority has felt disadvantaged at some point in time. It's very easy to write it off and say, it doesn't matter. But it is also very awkward to be the only person not wearing the black suit in that room. It's always tough to be someone who's a little different, not just from a gender point of view, in thinking. It's always a challenge. I think in India, for instance, there's a really funny incident. When I started my career, Forefront was founded by 2 male partners and I, and we went to meet a broker. And, we all reached out to shake his hand. And he shook my first male partner's hand, my second male partner's hand. And then when I reached out to give him my hand to shake, he did a namaste. So it's small stuff like this, and it probably comes from a very harmless place. But it's small stuff that constantly reminds you. And I think you just have to remember every time it happens to have your own voice, to be assertive, and to remember that if you're competent, at some point, better late than never, people will recognize you for that.
That is really good. You are absolutely right. I mean, we see it all the time. And, I think now that we pause and take a moment to consider this in International Women's Day, perhaps also from your point of view, what have you seen in terms of investments and women in general? How different are women's investment styles, not just as fund managers, but also as personal investors? What makes this different, and how, what are these advantages or disadvantages that we see?
Actually, I don't think investing has to be very different for men and women. The one thing I have seen, however, is that women unfortunately take a little less interest in their investments than perhaps they should. we work super hard as anyone else does. And I truly think that learning how to invest and knowing your money, it's a life skill. You know, you're taught cooking is a life skill and driving is a life skill and swimming is a life skill. I think managing money is a life skill. And sometimes women are just very happy to say, at least in the Indian context, you know, let someone else do it for me. It's not that they don't have the capability to do it, it's just that we choose not to do it. Perhaps, you know, our industry is a little guilty of making money and investing sound very, very complicated. And, you know, I'd encourage women to tell you, you know, that it's not complicated. If you're smart enough, you know, to be in the boardroom and have a great career and manage home, you can definitely get involved with investments. And historically, you know, in folklore, women have been very good budget keepers. They've been very goal oriented, which is very important in investing. They've been very disciplined. So the basic qualities that make you a good investor: goal orientation, discipline, sensible understanding of not getting carried away, which we call risk in the investment world. These come to us.
And also probably the long-term view.
Yes, we're very patient. Yes. The long-term view. I mean, you know, women know what it is like to have a long-term view. They raise families over the long term. They're very, very long-term oriented. And as I said, the whole understanding of risk, of not getting carried away, I think that comes to us very, very naturally. So the qualities to be a good investor, the emotional qualities are all there.
Maybe it's even been said, however, that women are probably too risk averse. Would that be true?
It is, and I think it, you know, again, I hate to generalize, but I think it is on the, you know, and it's not risk averse because they're not ready to take risks. Sometimes you're just not ready to understand. When do you get risk averse? You get risk averse, you know, when you don't have enough knowledge. And, you know, the convenient answer is, let me just keep my money in a deposit. Why do I need to bother? And, you know, my answer to that is that, you know, money isn't everything, but money can solve a lot of problems. Money can help you fulfill a lot of dreams, you know, and it's not just your child's education or a vacation. I remember in the younger part of my career, one of the smarter things I did was to start saving early and start investing early, so that when I wanted to start Forefront Capital, I didn't have to go to anyone else for permission to do that. So managing money can also help you fulfill some of those dreams, you know, that you have.
That is actually really lovely. I have 3 children. I have 2 boys and 1 girl. My sons, they spend all their money. My daughter is 11. She's much younger. She saves on a daily basis.
Oh, wow. So that's a great example.
So I was going to ask you, then, you know, as a woman and as a very successful woman investor, what is your advice for women who are investing perhaps for the very first time?
I think, Patricia, the most important advice is to get started. And there's a tremendous amount of inertia, as you said, you know, that just doesn't make us get started. And for young women who are starting their career, you know, the head always says, you know, it's too small, you know, I'm going to invest 5,000 rupees a month, $100 a month. What difference is it going to make? My point is, it does make a difference. And, you know, you will make mistakes in your investment journey. I did. I'm sure you did. Every woman does. Every man does. But when you get started early, you get financially literate and you make your mistakes. And hopefully by the time you're 30 and you have much larger incomes, you don't make mistakes on larger amounts. So my first and most important advice is get started. Know the basics. And, you know, in a country like India, there are just so many basic inefficiencies. You know, women keep money in bank accounts, which is very inefficient. The government has given you so many methods to save tax legally with tax saving instruments. Just get that stuff right. I mean, that's it.
And that is very good advice for the young women who are out there. And it's wonderful because we have more and more young women who are independent, who are well educated and financially independent. What would be your advice for a married woman who's all this while left the investment to her husband? What would your advice be?
I think it's a great question. I think, you know, regardless of whether you're earning or not earning, you know, when you're married, money is a joint decision. And, you know, when you're married, I think you have joint goals. you have joint dreams, you have joint aspirations. So that conversation about how money should be used should be joint. Many women often ask me, I was in a seminar, how do I initiate that conversation with my husband? Is he going to say, why are you asking me? Do you not trust me? You have a right to know and you have a duty to know. I hate to say this, but life is very, very uncertain. The minimum you should know is what the wealth of the family is, what bank accounts there are, where the investments are, and that's a way to start that first conversation with your husband. You have a right to know because life is very, very uncertain. And then work with your husband and set up goals. Some of them may be his goals, some of them may be yours, some of them may be family goals. And then plan your investing around those goals.
That's very, very good advice. I mean, I think back to when I started working, and I was told by my very first financial advisor that research shows that women typically outlive their husbands. And at that time, I wasn't married and I didn't even have a boyfriend. And she said ultimately women spend their hard-earned savings and investments paying for their husbands' medical bills. And they themselves then die poor and alone. And she turned to me very severely and she said, don't let that happen to
Yeah.
you, right?
It's very telling.
This is very, very good advice for women, and I think it's something that we should all heed. I'm very heartened these days when I look around and I see that actually a lot of women, especially the younger women, are really taking the investment on themselves. So maybe I could ask you for, maybe a little bit of a personal note here. Now, we see you today very successful, very well known, a woman who is so established in a male-dominated field. What advice would you give to your former self? If you could now look at your 20-year-old self
Yeah.
and give her some advice, what would you say?
I think it would be to dream big. And, especially for women, because I don't think we dream big enough. And not just to dream big, but then to work very, very systematically to make those dreams come true. At any point in time, you'll have to realize there are good things about you and there are bad things about you, and you have skills and you have weaknesses. Have dreams, have 5-year dreams, 10-year dreams, 15-year dreams, and be very honest about yourself and say, this is what I'm good at, this is what I'm not good at, and get better at your strengths, work on your weaknesses to a certain extent, and dream big. That's the one thing I would say to all girls out there. And ask for opportunities. Part of dreaming big is also to ask for that promotion at work, to say that I can do this. I see girls on my team all the time, and a girl, Patricia, will be 8 out of 10 in caliber, but she'll rate herself a 4. And a man on my team will be 4 out of 10, but he'll ask for that next opportunity. People are not going to give you things. You have to ask for that opportunity. So dream big and ask. Work to making those dreams come true.
So I'm sure you have achieved most of your dreams. You're already at the pinnacle of success for yourself. What more for you, Radhika?
So I'm very early in my, I think people are very, very kind, but I'm very early in my career, and I want to do a ton of things. I think professionally, I'm very excited about the business I'm in. I lead the mutual fund business, but I'm very ambitious about the business and where I want to take it. So I think that's going to keep me busy for a while. I do at some point want to contribute to India in a much broader way, either through government or things like that. So that's something I harbor. And personally, I don't know if you know this, I love to write, and I love to speak, and I love to tell stories. So I hope to grow that platform. I really believe it's a very, very powerful platform. So I have a ton of work to do on that front also.
So not just the investments keeping you awake at night.
Oh, no, no. Investments is a part of your life. Money is a part of your life. But I think life is much bigger than money.
Wonderful. And maybe a final question before we turn it open to the floor.
Uh-huh.
So, now that you have done all of this and you've got all these plans, what's your advice going to be when it comes time for your daughter to, take the helm?
I think I would tell my daughter, when I have one, and I hope I do have one, that do what your heart sets out to do, and remember you're no less, not just than any man, but than anyone else. Go be the best version of yourself, and whether you want to be a cook or whether you want to be a model or whether you want to do financial services or whether you want to be an actress, go out there and be the best version of yourself because life is truly beautiful. You know, every person is special. Just make the most of your own potential.
Wonderful. Those are wonderful words for International Women's Day, and I thank you for all your advice. You know, really an inspiration to the women out there.
Thank you.
I'm going to now take a few questions from the
Please.
floor. They're coming in. So, one of our audience is asking, I'm a long-term investor, having been in the market for over the last 15 years and continue to be so. So my query is index funds or passive managing going to be the future?
This is a very good question. Firstly, I'm glad you're a long-term investor and said 15 years because I hear lots of things with long-term that are 1 and 3 years. So very happy to hear that. I think, you know, at least in the Indian context, you know, passive funds have a role, and there's been a lot of talk in the last year about active or passive. I think globally passive, you know, has been a big trend. I think in India it's early to say. My own personal view is that in a certain segment of our market, which is the large cap market, you know, lower cost funds, what are passives? They're lower cost funds. They will have a role to play because it will be harder and harder to generate alpha. I think in the mid and small cap segment, you know, identifying companies bottom up is still going to be very, very powerful. So I think your portfolio will probably, the portfolio of the future will probably have a mix of active and passive.
But it's also very much going to follow the risk profile of the people.
It's absolutely dependent, you know. I mean, it just depends on what you need. And remember, passive and active are tools. First, it's important. I mean, you're investing in equities, so you have to have the right amount of equities for your asset allocation and risk profile. It starts with that.
Very good. Okay, another question for you. Radhika, you said historically women are good budget keepers and hence can be good investors. What are your views on women taking high risk on investments as well?
I think anybody can take high risks on investments as long as they know what risks they're taking. You know, investments, I'll go back to what you said about risk profile. Your asset allocation is most important when you do investments. High risk products should be a part of your asset allocation if you're ready for it. And they should be a small part of your asset allocation. And when you go into them, go in with so if, you know, a high risk product, for example, is a small cap fund, if you're going into that, definitely go in with a long-term time horizon and go in with full disclaimers, knowing that, for instance, in this category, you know, my capital might be down 30, 40, 50%. So it's not capital that I might need immediately. So high risk is great in limited sizes as a part of your asset allocation and with full disclaimers. And I think here your advisor can really help you.
Right. So it's really all about your asset allocation
Absolutely.
and diversification. We have another question here, very topical again. There are a lot of reports that say that overall women make better investors than men. Is this true?
I don't know. There are too few women investors for me to say that. The sample size is really small. I don't think it's about women and men. As I said, investing is a lot more behavioral than technical. And it's a myth in our industry that, you know, you need to be a stock picker and talk shop all the time or talk stocks all the time to be a great investor. I think women inherently have the qualities of discipline, patience, goal orientation. And I think anybody who has these qualities, man or woman, should make a good investor.
I guess probably what we don't see too much of, or we haven't seen in the past, is the rogue traders who are female.
Yeah. Well, the problem is, Patricia, you haven't seen traders who are female in the first place. You don't have enough traders, you don't have enough fund managers, you don't have enough asset management professionals. So the sample size is super small.
But perhaps, you know, in general, even when it gets bigger, we will hopefully see that women...
hopefully we won't be the rogues.
will temper this whole thing.
We'll calm that down.
Okay. Just a second here. Hang on.
Uh-oh.
I have indeed. One second.
1 second, guys. There we go.
Okay. All right. Now somebody is asking a very personal question,
Okay.
a little bit personal, but actually also a little bit about your investment, which is name 3 books that are a must read or have shaped your personal and or investment journey.
Okay, so I have to confess that I don't read too many investment books. One book that I do like, and it's a little more behavioral, is a book called The Power of Nudges. It's by Richard Thaler, who won
Nobel.
the Nobel. And it talks about the fact that, again, there are human biases that we all have, and it's kind of okay to have them. Like we don't like change, we're very lazy, we revert to the default. But are there small nudges that we can put in place to kind of, do things that we wouldn't otherwise do, but that are actually good for us? So I think that's a great book. There are lots of investment books out there. I have to confess, I'm a very avid reader. I try to read about 50 books a year, but I read 30. And most of them are fictional, and there's stories from around the world. So that's probably what you'll find in my book collection.
You probably read more than enough reports. You don't have to read books
Yeah,
as
no,
well.
I don't feel the need to read too many investment books.
I agree. I think you're a practitioner. So there you are. We've got lots of questions coming in.
Oh, wow.
Which is the best way to create a bouquet of investments rather than putting all your eggs in one basket?
So firstly, it's super important to create a bouquet. We talked about asset allocation, and it's very important to have a bouquet. I think if you looked at your basic asset allocation today, it would have some amount of equity, and you could split that equity into large cap, mid cap, small cap, and some amount of fixed income. Perhaps more sophisticated investors would have asset classes like international equities or gold, etc. But equity and debt have to be a part of everyone's asset allocation. And within equity, as I said, you have subcategories. Within fixed income, you have subcategories. Larger investors may also look at other asset classes, alternatives, for instance. How much equity and debt to have, I think, is a place where a financial advisor really comes in, because it's dependent on your life stage and risk profile. Younger women, for instance, may want to have a much larger portion of equity because they can afford to take the risk. Older women, will be, as you move into retirement, you want to have more fixed income in your portfolios. Beyond that, I think it's a function of your goals. But these two are a must-have in your portfolio.
Very good. And now a bit more personal question here. Who are your role models?
This is a tricky one. I get asked this a lot. I think India has a tremendous heritage of women who've done exceedingly well for themselves in corporate India. I think Zareen herself, who runs the Stancy India business, and many Indian bankers have been women. And I genuinely believe that Indra Nooyi, who heads Pepsi, I think they're great stories. Zia Modi. I think any woman who's risen, especially in the Indian context or even in the global context, to where she has, honestly has a great story. And I don't think role models necessarily have to be women. I told you that at some point I want to contribute to government in some way. Nandan Nilekani in India headed Infosys, and then he went on to build the very successful Aadhaar project. So
Yeah.
someone who contributed both at a corporate level and a social level, I think those are great stories.
Well, we hope that one day we'll see you there as well, inspiring a new generation of not just women but also men. Yeah. A very specific question now, sector-specific question.
Okay.
What's your view on the API pharma space
Oh, God. It's a very
in the
specific
market? And is the impact of China shutdown temporary, or is that going to be a long-term one?
So I think, I won't comment on the specifics, but from a sectoral perspective, at least in our funds, we know pharma has been a trend that everyone's been talking about. We've still held back on doing, larger investments in pharma. And we think both the regulatory issues from a US point of view, as well as I think China may be a shorter term event. So we've held back on our own investments in pharma in a big way. I do think, by the way, sector-specific investments, man or woman, is something that we've never had. We don't run sector funds in a large way either. We do believe portfolios should be diversified, and you can express your views on pharma or consumption in a more diversified portfolio. But equity portfolios should be a lot more diversified, just because individual sectors are very susceptible to this kind of risk that was talked about.
Right. That's good advice. Another question, fund management in India is probably more male dominated than the average
Yes.
across the globally. Apart from you and a few well-known women fund managers, we don't have many females in this.
Yeah.
So what's your view about this situation, and what can
So-
we do about it?
So I'm not happy with it. I think I'm the only female CEO, and Morningstar just put out a report that 7% of fund managers in India are women. I don't think it's a great situation. The solution actually starts at the mid-level. So, I think senior women, senior fund managers are an outcome. You see a lot of entry level. The problem is you don't see them carry over into mid and senior management, which is why when you come to the CEO or CIO level, you just don't have enough women. So companies need to do a lot more to sponsor and keep women there at the mid-level. Also remember that the fund management industry in many places came from the sell-side research, trading or broking background, which were traditionally very, very male-dominated. I'm optimistic that with more women going for CFPs, CAs, etc., you'll have a lot more entry-level pool. And by the way, to an earlier question that you had asked, I do believe that one senior woman can pull up 5 more senior women very, very quietly. It just happens. So I see it in my organization. I think as a mutual fund, we're probably 30% women, which is reasonably high. So you get one senior woman at the helm, and you'll suddenly see the whole culture kind of start to change.
Is that what you're doing at Edelweiss?
I think we're subconsciously doing it, and I don't think you have to take very conscious steps sometimes. It's important to take conscious steps, but just I think when you have more women on the floor, the culture of the floor becomes a lot more women friendly. It just subconsciously happens. The language, the policy towards work life, the empathy, the way meetings are conducted in the conference room. And I was having a debate with someone in the morning. I think women need positive role models. And I think that, the workplace creates that for you.
What sort of message does that send to the men in your organization, maybe I can ask?
I think it's a very positive message. I think that, diversity of thinking. I started my career at McKinsey, where my analyst class had lawyers, astronauts, engineers, painters, and it was not just gender, it was about diversity of thinking. And I think the floor becomes a much more vibrant place because in a conference room you have so many perspectives. So I think man or woman just having a lot of different kinds of people makes the office a better place to be.
Does it make a lot of arguments?
Oh, by the way, I think if we had an all-male floor also, we'd have a lot of arguments. You just have different kinds of arguments. But it makes for a lot of fun on Women's Day because all the men today morning were complaining that they don't get attention on Men's Day.
Right, but Men's Day is all the other days of the year, right?
It's November 19th.
Is it November 19th?
It's apparently November 19th. So they want something. So we said this year we'll do something for them on Men's Day.
I see. Well, that's very good. Okay. I think we have another question here from one of our premium banking executives. And at Standard Chartered Bank, we've created a new segment really for the emerging affluent because we realize that this whole segment is underserved. So one of our premium executive is asking this question based on client concerns now. Last year was very volatile.
Yes, it was.
Most investments are in the negative, which is really upsetting for clients. What would be your advice to these clients, and how do they how should they do their further investments, and what would the market performance be expected to be in the coming year?
Sure. So one, it's very hard to predict market performance, but I think this is where the executive or the advisor plays a very, very important role. Last year was a very, very volatile year, and I also know it came on the back of 2017, which is an exceptionally good year, so clients were feeling very good. I think what you have to talk to clients about is the fact that portfolios have to be very long term. We say this again and again, but equity portfolios have to be long term. I think going into this year from an Indian context, obviously it's going to be a volatile year. We have an election coming up, and that's a fact. But the fact is that when you're looking at equities in particular, companies are doing well, companies are growing, and ultimately equity market performance is related to the underlying growth of the companies. I think if you've invested in equities over a 5-year cycle, you have seen wealth creation, and advisors constantly need to go back and remind clients about that. And also perhaps a lighter piece of advice is not to look at their portfolios every day. That'll cause them a lot more calm.
Yes. I think this particular question was coming from one of our advisors, actually, who
Yeah.
probably is facing a lot of flack.
I'm sure, and I think the role of an advisor is extremely important at this time. In a year when everything is great, clients are just very, very happy, as we all would be, and people ask a lot of questions when times are tough. I can
Yeah.
also tell you from my personal experience, having seen 2008, that one, remember, no crisis lasts. There's an end to every kind of crisis and every kind of drawdown. And we often have to be a little counter-cyclical. We have to be a little greedy when others are getting fearful. You actually may see great opportunities. And secondly, for advisors, the one thing I'd recommend is that, at this time your client needs you the most. So go out there and provide information. We feel a lot more nervous without information. When we have information and certainty, we find a little more comfort.
And perhaps at this stage, a woman financial advisor might actually have
Yeah,
the softer
might
side
help.
to be able to advise.
Exactly.
Accordingly. Another good question. What's your view on balancing work and life for women? And in particular, women who take a break to raise their children. What's the best way for them to come back to work, especially within the financial sector?
Sure. So I think there are two parts to this question. I've never liked the word work-life balance, because it makes it sound like work is this very horrible place, where nothing's fun and it's all dreary. It's like the factories of the US of old, and then life is cool and exciting, and, balance makes it sound like you're on a seesaw and constantly struggling. So I think you don't have to balance 50-50 at every point in time. There will be times when work is 80% because there's a big project and you're up for a big promotion. And there will be times when life or personal life is, 70% of what you do because you've had a child or, your child is in 10th and he needs you to be there. So I say work-life harmony, not balance. Seek harmony. I think for women coming back, it's a very conscious choice. Financial services, I'll be honest, is a very, very demanding industry. So you have to take the decision on when you want to come back. The only advice I would tell people, going in is that I think women give up too soon before they actually have to leave the workforce. So even when you have a baby 9 months in, you'll be working through those 9
Yeah.
months. I mean, you'll see that. And work better be a lot of fun for you to want to come back. So don't give up and don't, miss promotions and do all that and don't not take on that project because one day you're going to have a baby. And I see so many women, by the way. I think, maternity leave exists today in India. It's 6 months, by the way. I see many women coming back and doing just as well at work as they were before. So 6 months in a 30-year career is not going to change anything. Don't overthink those 6 to 12 months. Whether it's 6 or whether it's 12 is a call that you will have to take, but it's not going to, in the context of a 35-year career, it really, really doesn't matter.
I think one thing we're very lucky to be in Asia, for
Yes.
me as well in Singapore and for you in India, we always have help. And this is
Yes.
a massive boost
It's
to women.
huge.
Yeah.
And in India, we have the benefit of our mothers, mother-in-laws, and a family system that is so supportive. I lived in the US where there's no paid maternity leave, where you don't have family. So if you can't do it in India or in Asia, then it's much harder in other places.
Absolutely.
We all have it going for us here.
Correct. That is true. And I think that's it's going to be our century.
I agree.
A little bit of other questions. Is there still a glass ceiling when it comes to women in corporate roles in India, and especially within the financial services industry?
You know, I think I'm not sure if I understand the word glass ceiling completely. Glass ceiling means that someone sort of prevents you from getting to the top when you're there. I don't think that exists. It does and it doesn't exist. You feel it exists because there are so few of us. And yet the fact that there are even one or two of us means that, you know, it is possible. So I don't think someone's stopping you from getting there. It's just much harder to do it. It's just much harder. And I was at a Wharton event where I met a friend who's the CEO of a large manufacturing company, a friend who's the CEO of a film production company in India, and all three of us were talking about the fact that there are no women in our industry. So it's not just a financial services issue, but I really think a lot of the onus is also on women to go ahead and ask for those roles and work towards that promotion. I mean, if you want the top job, at some point you have to ask for it and you have to work towards it. It's not going to come to you. It's not going to be handed out because it's a competitive world.
That's right. I mean, the best woman.
The best man, woman, whatever will win.
Yeah.
And you have to ask and you have to prove that you're capable. And if you're a woman, the reality is that there will be a lot of perceptions because you're different. I mean, a lot of the decision makers are men. That's true. There will be a lot of perceptions about are you too soft, are you too aggressive, etc. I mean, women grapple with these stereotypes. You'll have to work doubly hard to prove those stereotypes wrong.
That's true, absolutely true. A few more other questions. One is about specific investment advice for fresh graduates, women or men, and specific investment advice for senior citizens.
Sure. So I think with senior citizens, it's very important to plan out their retirement well, and start planning it well before you hit the retirement. So if retirement is 60, then start thinking about it at 50. Obviously, your portfolios need to become a lot more conservative, so they'll start to have a lot more fixed income in them. The second thing is you need to work towards regular monthly income. Monthly income stops after retirement. And I think now using the funds platforms, there are enough solutions that enable you to get a monthly income from your investments. So that's very important. I would also tell senior citizens that money is to enjoy, and there are a lot of unfulfilled dreams that you have when you hit senior citizenhood. So don't just think about investments, think about how money can be used to fulfill those dreams. Also work very hard towards getting your paperwork in order so that succession planning, etc. People just don't do this enough. Women, by the way, live longer than men. So that is another reason to know your investments. If your husband passes away, do at least know all the paperwork.
Absolutely.
So that's very important. I think for young college graduates, one, start early, as I said. Second, be simple. Our millennials are a very smart generation, and they do think that often, I need to do complex stuff to start my investments. Start by getting the basics right. Investments is not a competition about how much you know or what return you're going to make. As I said, it's about being disciplined and goal-oriented. So start with simple solutions, get your basics right, and you'll be in reasonably good shape.
That's true. It's all about the discipline and starting early.
Yeah, and I think the other challenge with millennials, if I can add one thing, is that expenses. You have to carve out a portion. So I tell young kids that assume that the income you earn, you actually only earn 60 to 70% of it. If your salary is X, assume it's 60% of X and just save the 30-40% of it, because you have to get into a habit of saving. And that, I think, is something young college graduates struggle with a lot.
I think I was very lucky. Like you, I was a consultant. I was with Bain and Company.
Uh-huh.
And like you, I'm sure you worked far too much.
Oh, yeah.
And I remember, when I left for business school, I looked back on all my salary and I calculated it, and I realized that I still had 80% of my salary in my account.
Oh, wow.
Because I just had no time.
You had no time to spend. I mean, you were always traveling, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so with that, I was able to start
Save
my
something.
first investments and so
Yeah.
on. And it was
Yeah, I think that's how I started too.
blessing in disguise.
Yeah, seriously.
Let me see. We've got a lot more. This is a good one, and I think I recognize the name. It probably comes from one of our premium banking advisors.
Uh-huh.
Mostly, when they speak on the phone, they tend to deal with the men in the family,
Yeah.
and they're the decision makers. On occasion, they have interactions with women clients, and there they find that there's too much dependency on advice of other family members.
Yeah.
What is the best way to make the women clients believe that they can make those decisions as well?
I think there are two parts. I think one is to get your women clients financially savvy. So work with them to get them up to speed on the basics of investments and the basics of taxation, so that they don't constantly feel that they need to call someone else. I think the second conversation that you need to have with your women clients is around goals, and the fact that every individual will have goals that are very specific to them. Those goals are very different from their husband's goals, their children's goals, their father's goals, and so they have to be reasonably goal oriented. And if you can if you can help them make a few investment decisions themselves and see success, the next time hopefully they won't go back. I think that's very, very important. So you need to play that role as an advisor of giving them knowledge and confidence and a little bit of success, because success does wonders.
That's good advice. Um, we have so many more questions. I'm just trying to look through them. This one comes. This one talks about investing, saving for the future, buying a new house, retirement planning. All of these things are still seen. Again, this question is about the male in the household.
Yeah.
Is it necessary for working women in families to take charge of this and equally provide some of these answers to these questions?
I think so. It's a very personal question, but I think as a woman, you need to have that control of the money that you earn. As I said, life is very, very uncertain. I've seen women who lose their spouses. I've seen women who have unfortunate divorces. And while I say again and again that money is not the solution to every problem, having that investment pool in your hand gives you a lot of freedom in the case of very unfortunate events. It also gives you a lot of control if you want to start a business or a venture of your own. Say you've been working for 15 years and you then have a child and you decide, I want to step back and start a business of my own. This is where the capital could come from. So I think that's why it's important for women to get involved. It's also, as I repeat, a life skill. I mean, why do you need to learn how to cook or swim? It's a life skill. Managing money is a life skill, and by the way, it's not a hard life skill.
Very good. Maybe I can ask a different question a little bit because I realize that, we've been talking all this while about investment, but actually you are first and foremost also an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about that journey because, you've just said some of the savings can also be used to fund your business. That must have been a real leap of faith for you.
Yeah, I mean, there's a book called Stay Hungry, Stay Foolish, and I think entrepreneurship requires a little bit of that. I lived in the US. I've never really lived in India prior to this because my father was a diplomat. And towards early '09, when the financial crisis had subsided, we decided to come back to India and start a business of our own. It was just a decision. I was 24 at that time, so it was a very, very young time to do that. And I don't think I overthought it. But I think entrepreneurship is something a lot of people, everyone should experience. It teaches you a lot. For me, it taught me that managing an asset management business is not just about investments. There's a marketing side, there's a sales side, there's an operations side, there's a compliance side that we don't give enough value to. There's a whole side about interacting with customers, and it taught me the whole perspective of the customer. So I think it was very valuable. I remember doing everything in that experience, from getting our company's registration to getting our income tax card to managing my office and HR. And that's why I say it's something that everyone should experience. I think a lot of the things that we talk about in the workplace, ownership, being driven, entrepreneurship forces that on you. And I think there are great stories of women entrepreneurs in this country and around the world. So I would highly recommend it.
Wonderful. Let me see. I think we have. This one is just about specifically for women and
Okay.
Asking about stock trading.
Okay.
Do you think women make good stock traders?
As I said, there are not enough women traders, to do this. But I think stock trading is for a certain DNA. For a majority of men and women, money is a very, very passive thing because it's not, you work, you have a home, you have everything to do. So your investments are one part of it and they should be left to just work and grow. If you want to do trading, it should be a part of your portfolio. It should be a small part of your portfolio, in my view. It's something you do for fun and leisure. And some women, I'm sure, are very good at it.
Okay. And then this, I think we probably have a time for just one or two more questions.
Sure.
So this is obviously from somebody who is looking to invest. Is buying a home a good investment today?
So buying a home is not an investment. I think it's important to separate real estate from from financial investments. Unless it's a primary home is not something I think of as investments. Of course, you buy something that you can afford, but you buy it to live in. You don't look at its market value and NAV every day. You don't liquidate it if it's down 20% or if it's up 20%. So buy a home thinking it's a home, and don't obsess over its investment value, and then keep investments as an investment
So
portfolio.
buy what you love.
Buy what you love, buy what you can afford, of course, but buy what you love and buy it to live in it.
But perhaps I can extend that question. Buying a second home or
Yeah.
buying an investment home is now the right time.
I think so. One, I'm not an expert on real estate. My preference has always been that investments should be more liquid, and my bias has always been for financial investments. Because when you look at investments, it's money that you may need. It's money for certain goals. I think we sometimes underestimate the cost of the transaction costs of real estate, maintaining the thing, selling the thing, all the taxes that go into it. So if you're doing it, do a very fair comparison of real estate and financial investments. I suspect your financial investments will come out on top. By the way, the other question of buying a home, it's very locality specific. So this question actually is very, if I was sitting in Bombay trying to buy a 2-bedroom house versus if I was sitting in Seoul or if I was sitting, forget that, even in Delhi, the answer from timing would be very, very different.
Yeah, that is true. Okay, so I think we're pretty much done. Let me see if I'll take one last question. This is a good one, and it's about tax. And understanding the tax structure and the implication when investing is so crucial, but
Yes.
very few investment advisors ever talk about this.
Uh-huh.
Where can we go to really understand this whole issue?
So tax is super important, and it's important from two perspectives. One, as I said, is in India, for instance, the government, and in every state, every country, the government gives you so many ways, tax-saving instruments, that you can just invest in to save tax. I mean, that's your right. And secondly, the taxation on your investments, taxable investments is also very important. Certainly your advisor, you can ask questions about tax. You can ask your tax advisor. There are a lot of investor education guidance programs out there. There are a lot of web resources on tax. There are a lot of seminars that one can attend on this topic. But the first two questions I would ask my financial advisor is, what are the basic tax saving instruments the country allows me to use, and how do I maximize those? Do that. Second is, on every investment, what are the basic tax implications? Just ask.
Good advice. Okay, and with that, I think we've pretty much come to the end. I just want to say a very big thank you on behalf of Standard Chartered Bank for gracing us on this wonderful occasion of International Women's Day. Thank you, Radhika. You have been more than wonderful in sharing your advice. So, we hope to see you again in future.
Absolutely.
Yes.
And thank you guys. Thank you to the team of Standard Chartered Bank, and wishing you all a very, very happy Women's Day.
Thank you.